Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 17th of June. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information at weather.gov/Alaska. If you're traveling out of state, you can always just use weather.gov and click on the map. That'll take you to your local weather forecast office that's covering your travel information there, where you're going to be staying, wherever it is it takes you in the lower 48 states. The weather info line, of course, covers the rest of Alaska at 800-472-0391. You can find information about wildfires and ongoing weather events around the state, as well as just interesting tidbits and pictures that we like to share on NWS Alaska on Facebook. The same goes for Twitter. Using the hashtag AKwx, you can continue the conversation in that way. And of course on YouTube after this broadcast. If you miss a piece of it, you're out to sea for a little while and you get back a little bit late, no worries. You can always check that on YouTube. Use your mobile device too. It works really well with all your carriers' plans there. Not a whole lot of bandwidth to watch either the short weather briefing from the National Weather Service Anchorage or from our broadcast partner here at Alaska Public. Again, just simply search for AKwx TV in the search bar. Here's a look at the hazardous weather now. As you might guess, with the very large ridge of stable air across most of Alaska that is oh so hot. Hit 85 degrees today in King Salmon. It was that hot. The red flag warnings are still in effect. For all these areas that you see shaded in red from southwest Alaska to the interior, all of this is fire weather concerns, or a factor of lower humidity, wind, which we don't have a whole lot of right now, or the opportunity for thunderstorms to form, whether that's tonight or tomorrow. And all of these places that you see highlighted on the map, including Fairbanks, Fort Yukon, Arctic Village, out to Bettles, the Susitna Valley, and of course many areas eastward of the Alaska Range and north and across southwestern Alaska. All of these places have one of those ingredients that is making it dangerous for fire weather. So as an Alaskan, it is your duty to help everybody else in your community by being safe with fire and making sure that you are monitoring fire if you do not have fire restrictions in your community. If you are using a grill, of course, or some type of cooking device outside with heat, make sure you're following the rules, first of all, but make sure you don't leave it unattended. And if you are camping and you're not in one of these places, make sure you're doing your part to make sure that fire is completely extinguished, and then check again and again just to make double and triple sure that everything is safe before you leave that spot. Fire danger across the rest of Alaska, as you can see, is actually larger than those fire weather watches that warnings that we were talking about. You can see the high fire danger really extends all the way out toward Kotzebue Sound and runs all the way from the tip of the Yukon River as it crosses the Alcan border to the mouth. Same goes for the Kuskokwim Valley and places like McGrath today, where it warmed up to well over 80 degrees. South Central was fairly warm today as well, with temperatures in Fort Wainwright almost becoming Fort Richardson, I should say, almost becoming the hottest spot in the state. If it hadn't been for King Salmon at 85, Fort Rich would have taken it there. You can also see some higher fire danger across northern parts of southeast. Now, conditions will likely ease a little bit there here in the coming days if we get a few more showers popping up from time to time. But we're also going to need to watch for the threat for dry thunderstorms again across the Talkeetnas as we head through tomorrow. Dry thunderstorms, you're saying, well, what is that? It usually rains when we have showers and thunderstorms. And yes, it usually does in many places around Alaska, and especially in south central Alaska or Prince William Sound. The problem with dry thunderstorms are the humidity below that cloud is so low that when it rains through that, the rain simply evaporates, or evaporates a lot, leaving only sprinkles behind. That drier air is still descending and it actually warms up. The humidity can increase, and that can also fan the flames with that downburst wind coming down and out of the thunderstorm. Not to mention it's a thunderstorm. That means there's a spark or a lightning strike possible with that, and that can ignite new fires. So not good news to see dry thunderstorms back in the forecast. So let's look out west and see what could be changing as we head across the North Pacific. See a stream of moisture working off of eastern Asia. This is the main storm track. Here's the Gulf of Alaska here just off your map. Here's southwestern Alaska, and the main storm track's way down here. We have a ridge of high pressure up and over of Alaska, and underneath that everything is just on slow Alaska bake right now. and all the moisture and all the storms are coming way out here across the North Pacific. Watch this view one more time. There is very little, if any, northward shift with that storm track. You can see a few areas of low pressure breaking off and heading out toward the Kamchatka Peninsula, but all of that gets chewed up by this very stable region of high pressure and warm air across the Gulf or across the Bering Sea. Now look at it with a visible satellite picture. You know I love this visible satellite picture, right? Take a look at this. There is one storm here, or one area of low pressure, let's say. It's hardly a storm, pretty weak stuff. There's a lot of stratus here and fog, and watch as the sunlight moves across the map here and highlights all the stratus and fog across the Bering Sea. Look at that beautiful stuff there. As it stretches around high pressure, you can see it turning in that clockwise fashion, because that's how air moves around high pressure, which is just about right here this afternoon. And all these little lines stretching out across the southern Bering are your ships as you're traveling and moving from Unalaska to Adak to the western Bering Sea. Those are your ship tracks, your exhaust plumes moving through a very stable air mass and leaving your mark on the satellite map. That's pretty cool stuff. Same thing as a contrail. It's the same exact thing as we disturb that very stable layer of air in the atmosphere that when the aircraft go through, the exhaust allows that cloud to form, and we see that contrail. And if the winds are moving, we'll see it only for a few seconds. If the air is very stable, we'll see it for a long time. And that's exactly what we're seeing here at the very, very surface layer, just off the surface of the Earth, the exhaust from our ships leaving that trail across the clouds in the stratus deck. Now, we don't see a whole lot of clouds forming across south central Alaska today. We do see a few clouds over the Alaska Range and over the Kenai Mountains, but that's about it. The air has really dried out. If you were watching last night, we were watching for some thunderstorms to fire up off the Talkeetnas, and that happened. That traveled down Cook Inlet, and if you were in Kodiak this morning, you probably saw a pretty decent lightning show that was off to your east and moving right along the coast there with some rain, and most of the lightning seemed to be just offshore. That entire system traveled from the Talkeetna Mountains where it formed all the way down Cook Inlet and to Kodiak Island. It's pretty impressive stuff. In the Midwest, you might hear that referred to as a MCS, a mesoscale convective system, and it was very similar to that. In fact, if you watch the clouds very closely here, you would probably detect that spin earlier this morning, and that's what's left of it right there. That cluster of storms kind of spinning right here. Pretty cool stuff. You don't see that every day in Alaska, so the satellite picture, just a wonderful storyteller there, especially when we have so much sunlight to use for visible satellites during the summer months. Now on to the surface map there, because we've talked about satellites a really long time. Low pressure across the Gulf of Alaska, 1,015 millibars. The other one, just about the same reading. We had a few showers around Sitka and Juneau today. In fact, Sitka was one of the wetter spots there. It's picked up about 1/3 of an inch, nothing too out of the ordinary for Sitka. But considering that that was about the only spot in Alaska that had any sizable amount of precipitation, that was a little unusual. Showers across the Talkeetnas, out toward the Wrangell-St. Elias region. High pressure north of Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. Temperatures there today, a little bit on the mild side again, but just offshore, fog and low stratus there. And here's our high pressure system. And once again, if you remember that air around this turns in a clockwise fashion, well, you can see how those low stratus clouds and fog are moving right along with that. And we also saw this batch of clouds kind of snaking its way along the west coast today, and it left a hole as it passed Nunivak Island because it was traveling southward, and that the island disrupted the flow. So we've got kind of a clear spot here, a shadow more or less on the south side of Nunivak Island. So just amazing stuff that you can see with satellite pictures today. I could look at that all day long. Here's a look at the forecast map, because I don't have time to do that and talk about the rest of the weather with you. So showers across northern parts of southeast, south around the Dixon entrance there. Most of that's going to be pretty light stuff. There's the possibility for thunderstorms again to fire up across some of the higher terrain, and having a real hard time doing that this afternoon. We have seen a few strikes along the Alcan border today. A few showers around Kodiak Island can't be ruled out. Considerably cooler there today than everywhere else. Temps were only in the 50s compared to 80s in the mainland. We have a weak cool front trying to drop right across the Arctic coast there. It's moving eastward quickly, and it's running into, what do you know, high pressure that's going to chew that up. In our stable area of high pressure out across the Bering is not going to move. That sits at 1,030 millibars. Very little change in its position as we head into Thursday. You'll notice that cold front is dropping southward into the Yukon, and it's falling apart. There's really not much to write home about here. We'll probably see a better chance for thunderstorms across the Yukon with that than we will out across the interior. But one thing to watch, though, would be the trailing edge of this disturbance here. We'll watch and see what happens when that comes over the mountains. That might just be the lift needed to get some of those showers and storms going. Showers across southeastern Alaska are certainly possible for Thursday, maybe more than what we saw today. Stratus across the Gulf if you're traveling out. Otherwise, pretty clear stuff across the Yukon Valley. North of the Brooks Range, a better chance for cloud cover and some showers, becoming a little more rain as you head out toward parts of Attu and Shemya. Now here's Friday, and you can see that low pressure system across the northern Pacific shifting eastward just a little bit. The pressure gradient's tightening up, so the winds are going to come up a little bit more from east to west, up to about 25 knots or so out in the western chain. But again, really nothing substantial because this high pressure system extends all the way across the eastern chain in the Alaska Range, and it's just going to say, that's as far as you get. Not going to move a whole lot further east, and so it's not expected to just jump up here into the Gulf. But one thing that will change, though, for South Central, we're seeing a little bit more of an up inlet flow developing for Friday. So what does that mean? If you're on the coast in Cook Inlet, around Anchorage perhaps, and maybe even some parts of the Susitna Valley, lower Susitna Valley, you might have a better chance of seeing some of that stratus or low clouds, or at least a little bit of moisture working its way up the inlet. So we'll have to see how far that comes. This is kind of a developing ingredient here in the weather forecast. In the meantime, southeast still has some showers lingering around the Dixon entrance and the Queen Charlotte's, and then south of Wrangell and Petersburg, probably a little bit more cloud cover than anything else. Northward, a little bit drier, a little more sunshine. And again, we'll watch for those thunderstorms around the mountains and across the Alcan border and east of the Middle Tanana Valley. North of that, dry once again, clear sky, and then fog for most of the Beaufort Seacoast. West in the Chukchi Sea, we'll probably see some areas of fog and stratus, but there may be some opportunities for clearing there along the coastline as well. Now on to temps, 50s and 60s for southeast today. Another mild day for you. Places around Juneau very close to 60 degrees. Even with rainfall today, it was almost 60 in Sitka. And Prince William Sound up to 68 in Valdez, 67 for Seward, 64 in Kenai. And I believe it hit the 80-degree mark eventually in Anchorage today. Lower 80s for the Susitna Valley, including areas around the fire. Mid to upper 70s around the Tanana Valley. 77 degrees for Fairbanks, 70 in Eagle, 72 in Fort Yukon. And you see temperatures from the 40s to the 50s from Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, and then westward, temperatures jump up to 63 degrees in Atkasug, 50 in Barrow. Kotzebue Sound saw 50s and 60s today, 53 in Nome, 54 in Unalakleet, 73 in Grayling, and McGrath. Toasty in the lower 80s this afternoon. Same goes for Sparrowvon, 78 in Bethel. And then out toward Nunivak Island, sitting in the fog, was 48 degrees. On the south side, it was probably a lot warmer with more sunshine. Lower 80s around Bristol Bay today. Actually, King Salmon made it up to 85. 50s and 60s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sand Point, a balmy 66. Mid-40s for St. Paul and St. George, and 52 way out at Atka and Adak. And you'll notice tonight's low temperatures, 40s and 50s for most of the region. Same goes for southeastern Alaska, south central looking at lower 50s there. The Arctic coast, 30s and 40s, Nome 48. Southwest in the lower to mid 50s. The chain looking at readings back in the mid 40s with St. Paul at 40 degrees, a high of 49 tomorrow. Southeast back in the upper 50s to low 60s throughout the day. South Central still on slow roast, upper 70s to lower 80s. Probably a degree or two cooler than what you saw today, though, so there might be just a hint of relief. 85 in Fairbanks, Tanana about the same. 71 around the Brooks Range. And 66 in Nome, with Bristol Bay also close to 80 degrees for your Thursday. Flying weather, no major concerns. We'll see some hit and miss MVFR across southern parts of southeast. Severe clear, it looks like, safe for smoke across the interior, especially south central, and IFR on the Arctic coast, through the Bering Strait, through the Bering Sea, and through most of the chain in the Bering Sea coast for the Alaska Peninsula. Your pass conditions then should be pretty easy. VFR for Anaktuvik, Adigan Pass, all the way around the Horn for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, for Rainy Pass, and for Windy Pass. All VFR. Isabel Pass, also VFR. Mentasta Pass, visual flight rule, you can do this at home. Tanita Pass, VFR conditions. Portage Pass, also expected to be VFR. And what do you know, Chilkoot and White Pass, also looking at VFR conditions. How about that? Freezing levels show high pressure and a lot of warm air across the Bering, and that's exactly what we've been watching with the satellite pictures, and so no surprise there. Way high up there, freezing levels at 12,000 feet. The surface freezing line, though, just north of Barrow to about Wainwright. There is cooler air. Remember that cool front was dropping southward there, so a little bit of cooler air just east of the Alcan. But by and large, those freezing levels are way up there between about 10 to 12,000 feet in most cases. Icing potential, not much to talk about at all. Above 8,000 feet around southern parts of southeast, we might see some light icing potential there. Very few reports I saw today. Out across the western chain and generally south above 10,000 feet, but after that, the air mass is dry. This is why we're having dry thunderstorms at times across south central Alaska. There just isn't a whole lot of moisture to get sucked up into our weather-making machine. The jet stream is the predominant player here in our weather pattern, as always, but right now, if you can look at this and visualize underneath a big red blob under this high pressure center, that's why we're sitting here on such a warm weather pattern. High pressure out to the west, blocking out weather coming in from the Arctic and keeping the storm track to the south out over the Pacific. So there's just nothing to interrupt us at this point, and it does look like it will continue for at least another week or so. Westerlies are weak across the Arctic coast, about 10 to 20 knots, a little bit faster offshore at 35 knots. Light southerly flow across the continent there. Wind speeds around 5 to 10 knots coming into the eastern Gulf, a little bit faster over southeast Alaska and coming in from the south and southeast across the central and western chain. 20 to 25 knots, up to 30 knots at 3,000 feet across the western chain. Otherwise, light winds at 3,000 feet, 5 to 15 knots there for most in the interior and south central, and a 5 to 10 knot wind coming through southeastern Alaska at 3,000 feet. Turbulence once again, no major issues to report for southeast, for the north, for the interior, for south central, southwest, for the Seward Peninsula, the Alaska Peninsula, or the central Aleutians. You get a little bit further though, and the winds are moving a little bit faster. We'll say some light chop there from about Atka and west to Kiska and Shemya above 1,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation report. We'll talk about your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
This message is in support of the 2005 NOAA Safe Sanctuaries exercise. This is only a drill.
Emergency responders continue to address environmental impacts.
From the 800-foot container ship aground on Elbow Reef in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary.
Every year, NOAA responds to thousands of natural and human-induced incidents threatening life, property, and natural resources. During such incidents, NOAA is mandated to protect natural resources, provide weather data, and chart navigable waterways. To better fulfill this mission, NOAA conducted the first Safe Sanctuaries exercise in April of 2005 to bring together NOAA resources and expertise with other agencies for a hypothetical oil spill in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary.
Briefly, the situation is, as we know,
the planning unit calls in NOAA's Navigation Response Team. The reef bottom surrounding the wreck site is variable and difficult to navigate, especially for large vessels. So the Navigation Response Team uses a sophisticated side-scan sonar that creates real-time, high-resolution images of the sea floor. After mapping several transects, the strips are mosaicked together into a map. The map can then be coupled with marine charts and enables the planning unit to develop a salvage plan that will be the least disruptive to the sanctuary's sensitive environment. As information on the oil's fate becomes clearer, the Scientific Support Coordinator prepares shoreline characterization and assessment teams to evaluate shoreline impacts. These assessment teams include members from state and federal agencies and the responsible party, some of whom have never measured effects of an oil spill before. To standardize the assessment team efforts, NOAA runs training for the team members before they go into the field. Given the potential spill trajectories, the Scientific Support Coordinator deploys teams on 2 locations along Key Largo's eastern shore. They specifically record percent cover of oil on affected beaches and wildlife that has been oiled, such as seabirds or turtles. Returning to the command post, the assessment team leader presents the team findings to the environmental unit.
The northernmost area is where we saw the heaviest hit by oil, and it was along.
Also on scene is one of NOAA's Natural Resource Damage Assessment teams. This team collaborates with other groups from the Department of the Interior and State of Florida to work most effectively with the responsible party. This damage assessment team sends out assessment experts and sanctuary divers. They gather information on the natural and cultural resources that were harmed and at risk from the ship grounding and oil spill. Historical and cultural resources impart important knowledge of maritime history in the region. In this incident, the Portsmouth trader ran aground on a 1917 wreck, the City of Washington.
Due to the oil spill, we were only able to assess the injury to the anchor damage that occurred, and we found 2 anchor scars.
A marine archaeologist from the sanctuary evaluates the injury to the city of Washington, as it represents a significant historic site and is listed on the Florida Keys Shipwreck Trail. Using information provided by the navigation response and damage assessment teams, the Unified Command develops the best strategy to extricate the trader and avoid further injury to both the reef and the historical wreck. The Portsmouth Trader exercise also provides an important opportunity for NOAA to evaluate and improve its response and safety procedures. To check the accuracy of the oil trajectory model and provide another set of observations to understand surface currents in the Florida Keys, 2,000 wooden drift cards were released near the grounding site. The reef structure, tidal currents, Gulf Stream, and winds make this area tricky to predict currents, and over the next 2 days, oceanographers monitor the drift card movement. In this case, these biodegradable cards move straight into the mangroves along Key Largo's eastern shore, confirming the trajectory model outputs created earlier in the response.
The public is reminded to avoid touching the oiled areas or wildlife due to human health concerns and possible wildlife injury.
Throughout a spill response, public safety is also a key concern. NOAA sends out an all-hazards radio broadcast, warning people of natural and man-made disasters. The Safe Sanctuaries exercise and real groundings like it represent continuing risks to our coral reefs, shorelines, and marine resources. NOAA recognizes these threats and continually develops and tests effective response plans to protect life, commerce, and our natural and cultural resources.
It's never going to come out good. I mean, it's always bad because somebody loses, but it can come out better if everybody's working together. If you got a cooperative RP, if you got, the Coast Guard is being able to play the role they need to play, if all the state agencies and the local communities are able to play the roles they can play. And NOAA gets to play the role we can play, then you bring everything together, people cooperate, and it'll come out less bad than it could otherwise.
As you would expect, with all of this warm air across Alaska, there are a lot of changes happening out here across the Chukchi Sea, and the leading edge of this ice is now north of Wainwright. So there's still a little bit of ice between Point Hope and Point Lay and Wainwright, but everything else has really opened up, and we're seeing some changes out here well east of Kaktovik and Demarcation Point. So watch for more changes to come throughout the week. Weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php is where you can find that online. Southeast looking at light winds and mostly from west to east as we go through Thursday, anywhere from 10 to about 15 knots on the outer coast. The inner coast looking at 15 to 20 knots, a little bit stronger down around Clarence Strait at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. Southerlies in the Lynn Canal, of course, with a 3-foot sea. As we get into Friday, the winds are going to pick up there a little bit more to about 20 knots. Otherwise, 10 to 15 knots all areas from the west and southwest. From Yakutat at 10 knots with a 2-foot sea down toward the Dixon entrance with a 10-knot flow from southwest with a 3-foot sea, and light southerlies coming up through Clarence Strait, Cross Sound, and through Stevens Passage at 15 knots. Thursday across South Central, a light and variable flow for just about all places there, including Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, the north and western coast. A little bit more of a southwesterly flow up to 20 knots on either side of Kodiak Island and east of the Barrens. Look for a 3 to 4-foot sea there in the western Gulf and inside of Shelikof Strait. That should diminish as we go into Friday, more of a variable flow there. But notice that wind coming up to Cook Inlet there. We're going to keep track of that and see what that means for moisture and clouds coming up Cook Inlet as we head into the weekend. 15 to 20 knots on Friday is what we're talking about. A variable flow in the north and western part of the Gulf again, 2 to 3, maybe even 4-foot seas across the western Gulf as we get into Friday afternoon. Across Alaska Peninsula, more of a west flow in the Bering Sea coast and inside Bristol Bay. A variable flow from Castle Cape out toward Chignik and northwesterlies south of Sand Point to King Cove, 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. That too becomes light and variable as we get into Friday. A gentle southerly breeze coming up through Bristol Bay with a 2-foot sea. Otherwise, things are going to be pretty quiet across the Alaska Peninsula. Thursday, notice northwesterlies crossing on Alaska there, 15 to 25 knots. Everything else in the middle, 10 to 15 knots there. Generally variable, becoming easterly. As we get out toward the west, 15 to 25 knots with 6 to 8 foot seas from Kiska to Attu on Friday. That comes up even more to 30 knots, 11 to 12 foot seas there. Easterlies for the central chain, 15 to 35 knots on the south side, up to 10 foot seas, and still holding on to light and variable winds north of Nikolsky on Alaska with a 2 foot sea. For the west coast, gentle northwesterly winds. Remember, high pressure sitting out here across the west, so we have light northwesterly winds, 10 to 15 knots, 3 to 4 foot seas there across the west coast. Northerlies around St. Paul and St. George, 15 knots with a 3 foot sea, becoming light and variable as we get into Friday. Look for those 3 foot seas there around St. Matthew. A west and northwesterly flow still coming down the coast into Kuskokwim Bay. That's 15 knots with a 3 foot sea, and westerlies coming into Amonuk and around St. Lawrence Island around 10 knots. For the Arctic coast, north and westerly winds there from Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik, about 15 to 20 there. As you get around to the Chukchi Seacoast, that's 10 to 15 knots, generally from the west and southwest the further down the coast you go. The winds are coming up a little bit more here on Friday, 20 knots there in most areas for the west, with the exception of just outside of Kotzebue Sound, and winds becoming very light across the Beaufort Seacoast, only 5 to 10 knots, also from the west on Friday. Recapping tonight's weather, most things are going to be quiet in your part of Alaska. The exceptions will be some pop-up showers and maybe a few storms across the Talkeetnas and in the Alaska Range. It's been a hard time getting those started in most places today. We have seen a few strikes around the Alcan border. We have seen some showers in southeast. No reason that can't happen again tonight. Out across the west, a much better chance for seeing some light rainfall for the central and western chain. But high pressure is in charge, and that means widespread stratus and fog. You've been seeing it on satellite pictures there. You're going to see it again tomorrow. Low pressure south of Kodiak Island should keep things pretty dry with a trough of low pressure up through the Alaska Range. Watch for some showers and thunderstorms. A better chance for some dry thunderstorms around the Talkeetnas, unfortunately, again tomorrow. Showers across southeast. For Friday, a better chance for wetter rain showers and thunderstorms across the Alaska Range, Susitna Valley, and east of the Alcan along a trough of low pressure. All other places should be fairly clear and dry. Showers in southern southeast and across the central chain. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.